Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Endurance School. We are super excited to be joined here tonight at detention with Erika Ackerlund. Erika grew up in Helena, Montana, where her parents introduced her to a multitude of outdoor activities. She began swimming, biking, and running around age 13, and then swam and ran on high school teams while mountain biking on the side. She took a presidential scholarship to the University of Montana in the fall of 2014, where she discovered triathlon.
A little less than 2 years later, in the spring of 2016, she qualified for her elite license at the Collegiate Club National Championships and then followed up that success by winning the NCAA Women's Collegiate National Championships a year later. She's been racing as a professional since 2017, traveling all over the world on the ITU circuits. She has won ITU Continental Cups in Claremont and Richmond. And we Oregonians are super proud that she has attended and won a few of our local races, the Beaver Freezer and Best in the West. Erika, welcome to Detention.
Hi, I'm excited to talk tonight.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
We launch in with a question every time that you may know since, Elliott was on last week. But is this your first time in detention?
Yes. When I saw that you called it that on Instagram, I thought about making a joke, and I was like, no, I'm not going to tell people that I was too much of a goody girl to ever go to detention.
A lot of our athletes are really good. So you were not a troublemaker as a middle school, high school
Not in
student.
school, at least.
There's
Solid.
a good there's the
Okay.
good answer.
Okay.
There we go.
So how are you doing? This is kind of our COVID project. We had a physical gym and then had to close that when things kind of got when it became clear that this was not something that was going to last for a couple of weeks. And so the endurance school has been something that we really created to be able to reach our athletes in this time. What has this time given you the chance to do that you may not have done otherwise?
Yeah, so I've personally kind of taken this time a little better than a lot of people have, I think. Um, and I was actually at the end of my season this year kind of thinking about well, why did this go so well for me when other people struggled a lot? And I kind of came up with a few things, and I was like, well, for one, I got into triathlon because I really just liked going swimming, biking, and running. It wasn't about the racing. It wasn't about anything big. It was just I liked doing those things, and then people kind of pulled me into the racing. And so having this time of less races was an opportunity to go back and just do fun bike rides and drive somewhere to go for a run when normally if you're only home for a few weeks between races, you're just saving any extra energy. And so I kind of got to do those things that are the reasons that I started getting into the sport. And oh, now I can't even remember what my other reasons were, but that was the biggest one. I just really had fun with the training, and I liked doing big miles, and it was the chance to do big miles, and that's fun to me. So
That's great.
Nice. So your coach Elliott told us that you really only started training when you were a freshman in college. Could you tell us a little bit about your athletic background before you picked up triathlon?
yeah. So you guys said earlier, I did a ton of different sports growing up. My mom was always you have to choose one sport for each season. She always wanted us doing something, and so she made us try all these different sports. And then I liked soccer for a while, but then once I started running, kind of overlapped the seasons, and I had more friends in running, so chose that. And by the time I got to high school, I was doing a little bit of swimming, biking, and running. So I did running and swimming on the high school teams for a few months each year, but never year-round training. And then we had a mountain bike club team that is huge in Helena now. It's called the Helena Dynamos, but it was just getting started when I was in school. So once a week in the spring, we would go out and ride mountain bikes, and they even had me do a few local races, which was kind of fun. So that was my forte into biking, but I didn't road bike at all until actually the day I did my first triathlon. My mom had a road bike, and she brought it over for me to ride.
Awesome. That's great. So if you had your choice in these days where you get a lot of decisions for where you go to train and what type of training you could do, what would you choose if you had the day totally open to you?
oof, probably a long bike ride, because that's what I the most like want to do and don't get on my plan as often as I would wish. I like just looking at the map and like coming up with places that seem really far away to even drive and being like, yeah, I can go ride there on my bicycle and back. So I just think that's really fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You bring up the Helena Dynamos, which I think is a club that Jeff Proctor, sort of the godfather of American cyclocross, is involved with. Did you? And he was a teacher at your high school, if I'm not mistaken. Did he have any? Did you like interact with him in like an endurance capacity in any way when you were coming up in high school or middle school?
Well, so he started the Dynamos and was there every week when we went. I can't say, I don't that he wasn't usually leading my group. He had like a few other guys that also rode bikes with him in town that came, and they would each like lead a different group around the trails. But yeah, so he was there for that. And then one of his sons is my age actually, and I went through school with him in middle school and high school. So kind of knew the family through that a bit. But I never actually had him as my teacher. Most seniors in high school had him, and I had like the one class that didn't have him as a teacher. So, yeah.
Have you known anybody to like go to his? I mean, it's like you become an athlete now that travels to Europe and places like that. Did you know of any athletes that attended his cross camps in Europe?
So I don't know if I was just totally out of the loop or if he didn't really tell us about it, but I had no idea until after I had gone off to college that he was like this cyclocross guy that coached the national team. And I kind of really realized it when there's a junior triathlete right now who is also doing cyclocross. And I like saw on Instagram one day that she was in Helena, and I'm like, what? Like, what is she doing in my hometown riding bikes? And then I kind of pieced it together and was like, yeah, I had no idea that he was even putting on those camps. So I'm not sure if that was me being out of the loop or what. But there was one kid, Landon Beckner. I don't know if you would have heard that name, but he was like racing mountain bikes. I'm going to say professionally, but I don't truly know exactly what level he was at. But traveling around to do it. And I knew that Jeff coached him. So in some sense, I knew he was involved, but I didn't know the details.
Got it.
Were you involved in cyclocross or just mountain biking?
No, I didn't really know about cyclocross until a few years ago.
It's very popular here in Portland, but I am too scared to do it because my collarbone.
I know Elliott's done a bunch. Has he talked you into a race here or there?
So there's a pretty big race in Montana called Rolling Thunder that happens in Missoula. And one year I had finally gotten my own cross bike, and I was like, I'm going to do this race, because it was like 2 weeks after my tri season ended or something. So, I was still kind of fit. And pretty much I finished behind everyone who knows how to do cyclocross and ahead of everyone who doesn't. I am not good even in triathlons at the mounting of your bicycle. Like, I lose so many seconds there that I really shouldn't. And that's a huge thing in cyclocross. So need to work on that.
That'll be a great place to get better at the ITU bike mount.
Would be, yeah.
You can amaze everybody by the true flying mount and not putting the toe down.
Yeah.
You should not talk to Chris too much about cyclocross. He has a very, very bad reputation for turning triathletes into cyclocross racers.
My favorite thing to do.
So I know that in high school you dealt with a few injuries during your training season. How have you been able, like, what changes have you made to stay healthy as a professional?
Basically, I just learned how to do PT. Like, I had constant injuries in high school that had me stop running, but none of them were major injuries. Like, I think one time I had a stress reaction, but I wasn't getting stress fractures or anything like that. I was just had weak hips, and we had like a sports treatment person who kind of helped you with that, but it wasn't individual attention like if you're going to the PT clinic. I never really learned like how much more benefit you get when you actually do the exercises properly versus just like kind of do it now and then. And I was like pretty against PT actually. I think the local clinic in Missoula here gave me a free a free visit to come in and see them, because they were like, we just need to get this girl in one time and teach her how to do it, and then she'll realize it's helpful. So now I go in all the time. And really it was like as simple as that. There was no big thing I had to change. I just did some PT.
I want to go back to that first triathlon where your mom brought you a bike for a race that apparently you had signed up for but didn't have a bicycle for. Could you tell us the story of that first race and just how it went?
Yeah, so my mom is like kind of to blame for me getting into triathlon, because when I decided to come to University of Montana, I was kind of hung up on it because I wanted to swim, because I was still into swimming, and running I was getting injured all the time. And there's no swim program here. So I was like, well, I like wasn't ready to be done with sports. And she'd heard of the triathlon club from someone like her age that she worked with. So someone who had been in school a long time prior. And she was like, I bet it's still a thing. Like, you need to go there and find out about this. You'll have fun with it. And she'd done like 1 or 2 triathlons, but not like big time triathlete or anything. And so I finally find the club. It was really small, so it took me quite a while to find it on campus. They weren't at like the major club events or anything. And there was one race that fall, like before it got cold, and they're like, hey, you can come do this if you want. So I signed up and thought it was going to be this big team that went, and it turned out it was me, Elliott, who I'm now dating, and one other guy. So I went with them, and like we get there the day before, and they go off to do all these warm-ups, and I just like sat in the room and did my homework. So I was like, well, I'm not going to go exercise the day before a race. Yeah. And then my mom brought me over her bike. And I actually won the race, and I was started like, it was one of those in heats. It was in the pools, and I was, in the middle of the race or something. And I just remember being like, I want to go fast enough that Elliott and the other guy don't catch me, even though they were starting like an hour behind. But in my mind, I had no idea how it worked. So yeah, it went all right, I guess.
That's incredible. That's a great first race story.
Yeah.
And then it was just all, did you like, how did that develop into, the rest of your collegiate career?
Yeah, so I did that, and then I didn't really do anything for a few months, and then I was going to some swims with the tri club, and I knew Elliott did some coaching, and so one day I was like, hey, like, do you think you could maybe like write me some plans or something? And so he did, and he kind of was the one who like introduced me to the idea of draft legal racing, and that there was this collegiate scene. And I was like, well, that sounds pretty fun. I'd gone to like some of the non-draft races, I'd done a few of the ones in Oregon, but just a lot around Montana too. And I liked it, but like I was with a bunch of people who are much older than me and just kind of different life area. And so I was like, oh, I could go like race with other college kids. That sounds fun. So I kind of got into it that way. And I'd reached out to the CRP because someone my mom knew from Helena had heard of the program and was like, oh, you'd be great. You should reach out. But she had no idea that like the standards were far beyond what I was capable of at that time. So they kind of politely turned me down and were like, well, keep trying on your own. But eventually I ended up getting there. I don't think at the time I even understood the system enough to realize that I was like trying to get there on my own instead of using the help. But
so you do some non-draft races and then get into draft legal racing. I know that both Molly and I wanted to ask you about like, what are the skills that you had to develop? And if you could talk about, a lot of our listeners and watchers, obviously are not doing draft legal racing. And if you could talk about how the sports are different and kind of how you had to adjust to the different style of racing, that'd be awesome.
yeah, so when I started out and was doing a bunch of the like local non-draft stuff, I was like thinking I was some amazing swimmer. Then I thought, well, at first I only had a road bike. I did eventually get a TT bike, but when I was just riding a road bike in them, I thought I was terrible at cycling. And then I was like a decent runner. And then once I transitioned to ITU, I was like, oh no, I'm like good at the bike and can't run or swim at all. So it was just like a learning curve to kind of, I had the ability to get like my swim and run up there, but it just took me a few years to truly figure it out. And then learning to bike in a pack and corner and stuff was, I'm trying to remember, like it was a few years ago at this point, but I feel like that was slight issue for me at first. I remember like the first few times Elliott and I went out on the bike and he was like, okay, you're going to try and draft me today. And I would ride behind him and the whole time he'd be like, get closer to my wheel, get closer to my wheel. And I'm like, no, like I'm going to crash if I go any closer. And then like learning to like have a slightly higher pedal cadence so that you could adjust your speed through like your pedaling instead of like braking in the middle of a bike group. That was something I thought I should do at first that didn't work out very well. Yeah, and so it's just kind of like stuff like that. And I ended up finding some different group rides in town to go out and ride with them. And it was like, you know, like little stage rides where you have various stages that you're racing. And so that kind of helped me learn how road racing works a little bit.
If you were to be able to coach yourself at that point, like knowing what you know now, what is something that you would tell yourself a few years ago about draft legal racing?
I think like probably one of the bigger things is just like telling myself that I'm gonna figure out how to do transitions that quickly, because I remember the first few races I was losing like 20 seconds in transitions, which is huge in those races. You know, everyone's within 5 seconds max, and then your time is 20 seconds slower, and you're like, how is that possible? And I just didn't understand how I was ever gonna figure that out, but a lot of practice and I got there. So I guess that's something like even in non-draft, it seems like a small thing, but it really can add up. I think at the Half Ironman World Championships last year, if I remember right, Gustav Eden made up like 20-30 seconds on people in transition. And so he hadn't swam with them, but then like he started the bike with them, you know, so it can change your race even in the longer stuff. And it's pretty easy once you practice to just keep it up.
What are a few of your like what would be some of your transition tips? Our athletes or listeners will always love to hear things like this.
Transition tips. I use this, I'm trying to think the exact name of it, like Tom's anti-chafe. It's like there's a ball and you like roll it onto your skin. So I put that on the top of my feet and in my cycling shoes and in my running shoes. And that just makes your foot like slip in so fast. Do not put it on the bottom of your foot or else you'll slip on any carpets that are there. But on the top, I always do that. That's like my biggest thing. One small thing that I've started doing that I learned from another girl was she puts her helmet so that when you come to your bike, your helmet's like, you're like standing with your back against the rack and your bars are in front of you at the direction you put your helmet on, instead of like looking at your bike and rack to put your helmet on, because then like your helmet's on and you're already in the right direction to run out. So those are small things, and then just making sure you figure out a way to hook the tongue of your shoes like over your shoe, like fold it over as well as you can, so it's easy to slide in.
Yeah, it's such like tiny things. You know, I think a lot of non-draft athletes would be like, "What?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
but I mean, what, you're totally right. Why not do it in non-draft racing?
And to much effect. So for your first attempt at NCAA national championships, you came in 11th. Is that right? Your sophomore year. So the next year you came back and won. Congratulations. And can you tell us about what you, like, was it just learning about the sport, or like what changed in that year that made that difference?
Yeah. So that first year when I got 11th, it was my first ever. Yeah. It was my first ever draft legal race. So, I mean, I just had no idea what I was doing out there. Obviously, I was fit enough to like kind of be in the mix, but I remember I was on the bike and I was like, well, the point of draft legal racing is to be in a pack. But like the people I was with, I could have just ridden away from them easily back then. And I remember every time I pulled, they would get a huge gap, but then I would have to wait. But I was like, well, I have to be in the pack. That's the whole point, right? So like looking back on that now, I'm like, oh, I don't know what I was doing out there. But yeah, so that was a big thing. And then like confidence too, because, you know, the first time I went to race a national championship, I've never done any race before that had people from all across the country at it. So kind of just like realizing, yeah, that's a place where I could do well.
Great.
Was there any change in like nervousness or anxiety between the 2 years? Like, did you like tell us a little bit about that? So many of our athletes struggle with race day anxiety, and like you said, there are athletes coming from all over the country to compete at a national championship, and it's a pressure-filled environment. How did you kind of develop that confidence?
Yeah, so I think I was actually weirdly enough probably more nervous the second year, because the first year like I really didn't know what I was doing. So like just the whole concept of it hadn't really hit me. Whereas the second year, suddenly I had like known some of these athletes and kind of followed them, and I'm like, oh, now I know that like so and so is really fast at running or this or that. And I knew that year I was in a position where like I could try to be one of the better girls, and I wanted to. So that was like the first time I'd come into one of these races with any sense of like a result that I would want. And I think with that is like where you start to get the nerves. Um, but that's race day nerves, and like leading up to it is something I struggle with a lot, to be honest. And this year, uh, before my first race, we had a few races in the fall. And before the first one, I was like off the walls nervous. Like the whole week leading up to it, it was just terrible. Um, and I was hanging out with some other people, and I was like on the phone with Elliott, and I was like, they're really not that nervous, and like I'm freaking out. Like, why do I have to be feeling this way when they seem fine? And I think the best thing that he said to me that I was like, okay, I can get my head around that, is he was like, if you have the nerves for the race day, then like it's because you have that same training mentality every day when you're training. And he was like, that mentality that makes you nervous is the same mentality that makes you like get the best out of yourself every day in training. So like if you can be that nervous for the race, you're doing the training well enough that like you're going to be able to go out and race well. And if you're kind of like nonchalant about it, then it's probably someone who's also kind of nonchalant about their training, and like over time that's going to show. So that's the best advice I have.
How did the race go? Did you feel like you had a good day?
Uh, yeah, that race,
Awesome.
I probably had the best race of my life that
Oh
day.
my God. That's awesome.
So yeah, it's also a little easier like backing it up from good races to be a little less nervous. Going into that, my previous race experience had been like less than what I would have hoped for. So that always kind of adds to nerves when you just want to show up a good race too.
Speaking of races, I want to. So, in one of your blogs, you talk about the Claremont Continental Cup, where you had some mishaps on the bike, and you end up coming off the bike in a position where you were like, I think this is going to be kind of not a great day, and you ended up winning the race. um, like, kind of walk us through that run leg, and then what has that result kind of made possible for you afterwards?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that race in a while, but that was just like kind of a mind blowing experience, to be honest. I went into the race like thinking I was swimming pretty well, and I don't know what happened, but I had a terrible swim. Never even caught up to the front group on the bike, which was pretty large, you know. Um, and I was just like, that was during a semester that I had actually deferred on school, and I was just training. So I'm like, well, I'm here. Like, I need to just go as hard as I can and make the most of this because I've put a lot into being here. So, like, a mediocre result's better than a bad result. So let's just go as fast as we can on the run. Um, and finally, I started catching some people. And then I started catching some more people, and I didn't really understand what was going on. Like, this was really the first time I'd been like a decent runner in a race. Um, and then, yeah, coming into the finish line, it was like not that far before the finish that I caught the final two girls ahead of me. And I was like, what do I do? Like, do I try and sprint past? Do I like hold on? And figuring out how to do sprint finishes is still something I'm working on. But that day I just like tried to power through it and not look back, and it did work out. But yeah, it's like once something like that happens, you just realize like you can't ever turn off, because even if you think a race isn't going well, you never know like what's going to happen to the people ahead of you. Maybe they're going to crash. Maybe they're going to just have a terrible day. Maybe they're actually injured and are going to quit in the run and you didn't know. So like you just always have to keep going. I've had one other race where I did have a bike crash, and I still finished the race and like kind of did the run mediocre. I didn't like push all out. And I think I finished like 1 or 2 spots out of making any money. And I kind of realized like, oh, I should have just ran as hard as I could, even if it wasn't where I wanted to be. Like, there's still a benefit to that.
Great advice for all of our athletes.
Yeah, keep going.
You have to learn it yourself, though.
Yeah.
You say in that blog post about that sprint finish that like your first thought was that like, oh, there's no way that I can beat these two, and then the next thought that came right after it was, well, I've been catching them this whole time. Like, why would that change now? How do you think? Like, why did that thought? How had you been prepared for that thought to arrive?
So, one of those girls was someone that my mom, who like looks at all start lists before I race, was like, Erika, there's a girl who's been to the Olympics at your race. And like back then that was like kind of a new thing for me. So she was someone I had on my radar. And then the other girl who was up there with her is someone that CRP had recruited. So they're generally known to be very good runners. And obviously I wasn't that standard. So yeah, like being up there with people like that, it's like, well, why would I bet on myself here? But I am someone who races hard, sometimes too hard. People will tell you, all coaches will tell you that, like on the bike in draft legal races, I still need to work on actually making benefit of the draft legal side and not just charging ahead on my own, which is what I've grown to do. But so yeah, I just like racing people and I like going hard and kind of realizing like as it goes that there's no reason to really count yourself out in any situation. Just go for it. So
it's a very good attitude to have given the profession that you're in right now. So you've been racing professionally since 2017, is that right? Yep. So this year though must be really different with all of the travel restrictions and just the general like world, that we're living in right now. How has that looked from your perspective? Like what's changed in the training and racing that you do this year?
Yeah. So that brings me back to like one of the other reasons I had thought of earlier of like why I feel like I fared a little better this year than some people did. And I had been set up in Victoria, Canada, training, and I'd been there all of 2019. And like in my mind, I was just, I didn't have an end date on that. So that's just where I was living and where I was training. So the fact that everything got canceled, I hadn't been at some training camp where I'm like there only because it's about to be race time. And when races got canceled, there was no like, well, where do I go? What do I do? I was just like, well, I'm still at home and I'm going to stay at home. And I have a good training set up at home because that's why I'm here. So yeah, it didn't change anything massively for that. I, was in one place up until we went to race in September. What did change is that I lost pool access and I swam 100% in open water from whenever the lakes warmed up enough, which was like May, I want to say, through early August. And then I had like 3 weeks where I was able to get in the pool before we went to race. So that was really nerve-wracking to me. I've really never done much open water swimming. And yeah, there's no way to like know your paces. And I'm constantly watching my paces in the pool. So I was just like, I felt decent, but it was hard to gauge it. So that was nerve-wracking.
Tell us about the open water training. How did you do it? Did you end up racing? Was everybody like only open water trained at that point? Like, is that something that was happening around the world? It was certainly happening here.
Yeah, it was like 50-50.
Huh.
There were some people who were completely same situation as me. I know like England they didn't have pool access and, they're colder weather too. So we were like in similar boats. Other countries had like found private pools and stuff that their athletes had swam the whole time. So like some of us had the month out of the water and then on lake swims, and other people had no change at all.
Huh.
So yeah, I had been in one WTS before that race and I got lapped out because I had a terrible, terrible swim. So going into this race, having that be my one swim experience, was nerve-wracking knowing that then my training in the swim is like had been the most disrupted. But yeah, I learned how to open water train, and like now I wouldn't be scared to do more of it. I actually think there was some benefit to it. I think like just being used to sighting that much and not having walls to push off of and everything, it actually was like really realistic training. And I was mostly swimming on my own. I had like one swim partner for part of the summer, but I figured out how to set my watch to have a beeper. So I could choose 2 times. It could, I could do like 30 seconds beep, 45 seconds beep. And all my workouts had to be set up like that. So it was like on, off with the beeper on my wrist.
Did you like wake up in the middle of the night, like hearing the beeper in your head? Like...
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So you studied exercise physiology in college, just like Elliott, just like your coach. Has that shaped the way that you train?
It's actually kind of funny because a lot of the exercise physiology professors here were really into triathlon and had done a lot of triathlon themselves. And the guy had for like the X-Phys class, the main class, he hated how triathletes trained, and like he was constantly making fun of, oh, triathletes do this and you shouldn't. And I would go back to, at the time Elliott wasn't my coach, I had Jennifer Hutchinson from Florida I was working with, and I'd be like, he just said all this in class today, like, is he right? And she's like, no. She's like, there's like what the books say, and then there's how you actually can do it in real life, and the two things are very different. So yeah, there was a lot of like, yes, you learned that in school. No, you're not going to try to apply that in real life.
Can you give us an example? Do you remember an example of one of those? I would love to hear the theory versus the real world practice.
Yeah, so the biggest one is like, as triathletes, a lot of us are trained to take a lot of food on training rides and runs, right? Mm-hmm. And every coach I've had is like big on that, like just trying to get me to eat more and more and more. And in class, he would always be like, and then you see these triathletes out with all this food in their pocket. Well, how are they going to learn to metabolize fat for fuel if they're always eating during their rides? And like getting carbohydrates into their system? Because like technically you would want to, like fast and then exercise if you're going to get the best fat metabolism out of your body. But real life, it turns out that just breaks you down too much to do any other training today.
Yeah. Then you just have a series of terrible workouts.
Right.
Yeah.
Feel like garbage.
Yep.
So was that a major you were pumped about? Like if you had it to go to do over again, what's your dream job right now?
I actually think that I would really enjoy doing exercise science research, cool. And like doing a master's and PhD program. And I volunteered in a biomechanics lab during college, which was pretty cool. So I think that would be really fun, but I also know that's like a very hard career path, not guaranteed to like make a lot of money at it, and would take a lot of years. So I'm not sure it's really in the boat for me at this point now that I've been out of school for a few years, but I do think I would enjoy it, and it's pretty interesting.
So the spring of your senior year, you made what I think a lot of us would think is a non-traditional decision, that you decided to skip graduating with your classmates to take a semester after what would be your graduation date in Australia. First of all, tell us why you decided to do that. And then tell us a little bit about the difference between the training environments in the United States and Australia.
Yeah, so when I first went to college, I really wanted to do a study abroad. Like that was something I knew I wanted to do the whole time. But like the first 1 or 2 years, you feel like you have so much time and you're not really thinking about it. And then I finally started thinking about it, but that was like just when I'd gone into triathlon, and I brought it up to Jennifer, my coach, a few times, and she was like, like, why don't you put that off? Like, we're making some real strides here with triathlon. I think you're going to see some results. I don't know that you need to go like take 6 months off. But it's like, I'd always thought of it. I had done a lot of Spanish in high school, and a little bit in college, though it faded towards the end, and now I've lost a ton of it. But so originally I thought like I'd go to South America or somewhere where I could speak Spanish. And then I just realized like I was too committed to triathlon, and that was just, it was going to be really hard to like keep up with both things if I did that. So I decided to go to Australia, which is great for triathlon training, but also happened to have U23 world champs at it during the time that I went for my semester. So yeah, the kind of the reasoning why I deferred and did it the next semester is for how it lined up with races. So it was really a triathlon thing, because there's a lot of races in the US during the spring when I would have been gone, and there's not a lot of races there. So, and then in the fall, there's not a lot in the US, but there was world champs in Australia. So it really was for triathlon, which looking back, I'm like, wow, I really made that much of a change for triathlon, but I did, and I don't really regret it. It worked out all right.
That's great.
Yeah, how did that race work out? How did under 23 World Championships turn out for you?
I got fit that year, which I was extremely excited about. It
Nice.
was a great race for me. And it was really fun to have like been training there, because people there know triathlon. Like, it's way different than when you tell someone in the US that you do triathlon and they're like, oh, you run a marathon? Like, people know it and people get it. And like the lead up to the race was cool because you saw all the signs going up around town, and the buses, like, I didn't have a car there, so I was taking the buses everywhere, and the buses had this huge mirage of Ashley Gentle, and it was like, come watch the race. So like people knew it was happening. I was swimming with a swim group there, which was amazing, super fun. And they give really good triathlon training sets too, lots of distance. But so like they all knew about it and were watching the race. Like people were at the race that I knew. So yeah, it was a really cool experience, since a lot of times we like travel across the world to do a race and we don't know anyone there. And, you know, like my mom's watching on the TV at home, but that's really it.
Oh,
so
great. So
yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I have an athlete who's training in Australia right now, and her like reports about the wildlife experience that she's had, specifically magpies, have been like absolutely astounding. Can you tell us about any wildlife experiences that you had while training in Australia?
The magpies are the big one for triathletes. So like no one really talks about that before you go. The way I first learned about it was I was out on a training ride by myself, and there was this bird, and I'm like, that bird's really flying like right at me. It seems like this is really weird. And I was like kind of up in the hills, so it wasn't like in town or anything. And then, sure enough, it swooped like straight over my helmet. I was like, that bird just tried to attack me. So I go home, and then I like learned from people about this. There's a guy from Australia. He wasn't there at the time, but I like texted him and I was like, is this a thing? And he sends me a photo of him riding. I don't know how he took this selfie. He's better than I am, but there was one like right here with like its prongs out over him. And I was like, oh my goodness. So people ride around with spikes coming out of their helmets to try and deter them. But the locals told me that it doesn't actually work. So I don't know. You could try it.
I would try it. I am very scared of those magpies.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in the Gold Coast of Australia, which I feel like was a good middle ground for like, it was still warm over the winter because I was there in winter, but it's not all the crazy animals like up in the north. Like there weren't, I don't think at least, that there were alligators around and stuff like that. I saw 2 cockroaches, but it was the day we moved in and the day we moved out of our apartment, so we decided that was just because we had the doors open for longer.
Makes sense.
Yeah, some big spiders, but nothing that was like lunging at me.
What are the magpies after? Why do they attack cyclists?
Oh, I might get this wrong, but I believe it's like they're mating or like having kids. Having kids, that's the wrong word. Having kids.
They're hatchling season.
Yeah, and they're just like really defensive of any predators.
It only lasts for like a couple months, apparently, like magpie attack season. I guess it's just ended in the part of Australia that Anna's in. But she was like, she sent me a meme that was like things that people think they should be afraid of in Australia. And it was like alligator, crocodiles. And then it was like things Australians are afraid of. And it was magpie.
It's totally true. I was really afraid of the sharks, but all the locals, well, actually, about 50% of the locals were like, oh, it's fine, you'll never see one. And the other 50% were like, you're going swimming open water? That's way too dangerous.
You're going to get
It
eaten.
was the lifeguards that told me it was fine. And then like the people I was renting from that saw me swimming one day and were like, you were swimming there? And I was like, yeah, the lifeguard said it was fine. But so I got a little too nervous after my first few swims and I never went back.
I would be in that
I had the luck to be able to be there for a little bit once, and like the first day I got there, like the guy was like, "Let's go for a swim." They're like, "Get in the water," and I was like, "Is this where you guys do your weekly swims?" And he was like, "No, mate, we stopped because of all the sharks." And I was like, "Why are we swimming?" And yeah, I think it is also a thing that they play on foreigners.
Yeah, well, it's a thing like when I see the Australians, they're like, well, you have bears and mountain lions. Like, aren't you afraid of that? Because that stuff actually hunts you. The sharks just, like, they just hang out and it's only if you get in their way. But I don't know. I'm not that afraid of the bears, but I'm very afraid of sharks. So.
I'm more scared of bears now after this conversation.
Sorry.
So take us through the moment when you realized that you were going to be fifth in the world. What did that feel like in the race, and what kind of like replay that moment for us if you can in your head?
Yeah, at the U23 Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that race again was like one of my better swims. So this is the pattern. When I have my better swims, I have my better races. And I got out of the water and I was just like so happy because I'd been doing a ton of yards with the group in Australia, and I was like, well, if this doesn't pay off, like this was a lot of wasted time and effort because it was a big change for me. And it did work out, and I got out of the water and like I see these girls right ahead of me that are like the people you want to swim with, you know, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I'm actually doing this. It's the biggest race of the year and I just put this one together. And so then you're on the bike, and that was actually my first Olympic distance triathlon. I had tried to go to a few before and they all got turned into duathlons. It was like the year when we had tons of crazy weather patterns. So yeah, it was like my first time doing the actual Olympic triathlon. So it was a bit of a new experience, and like it felt really long that day. It was a really hot day. The course was flat, so it wasn't like that mentally challenging or whatnot. You're just kind of like out there for a long time. And when we got to the run, I was like super excited to be up there, but then as it went on, to be honest, was kind of like, this is a really long time racing and running. And I'd had a really bad T2 and had to like catch up a bit on the start of the run. And there were two girls in front of me that ended up third and fourth, and they were like running together the whole run. And I like just never quite caught up. I was like 20 seconds back kind of the whole way. And I always think like if I'd had a better T2, maybe I would have been running with them and it would have been a little more mentally like in the game. But it was really kind of just like getting to the finish line. But yeah, I mean, going into that race, I think I'd been like, I would love to be like top 10 or something. So like fifth, and having been as close to the podium as I was, yeah, I was just kind of like, wow, like, okay, it's time to like race with the big girls.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine. I love it though. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So what are you excited about this coming year? What does 2021 have on the radar? I know it's hard to plan too much for things, but what are you excited about like as your career continues?
Yeah. So like they kind of are putting the schedule out a little later than normal, but actually last night I was on there looking. There's a few races out already, and I was like, where might I go this year? But it does seem like we're probably going to have a full season of races, unless things like turn much more sour than they are currently. They think they've got some locations that are willing to host. And so that's exciting, like, because, you know, I had so much training this year. So the idea of like going out and doing a lot of races is quite exciting. I'm not sure. Well, I'm going to Tucson for January through April. So gonna be in some warm weather for there, but then after that, I have no idea where I might be like living or training or anything. So it's really a year that's going to be played by ear, I guess. But yeah, I'm just excited to go do more races. Like I did 3 and I really had great experiences at them all. And I'm just like chomping at the bit to like go do some more.
Um, in one of your blog posts, you talked about seeing Lucy Hull make the front pack in the Olympics,
It's
and
a little embarrassing.
and then being on a start line with her, you know, like 6 years after that, and like you had kind of watched the race. I think it was like a few years after the Olympics. What did you imagine triathlon was going to be like then, and how has the sport like either confirmed that or been different?
So I remember the first time I watched that race, like it kind of reminds me how if I just show people a race I did and they don't know about triathlon, like it might be hard for them to really see what I'm seeing, because I went and rewatched that race on YouTube like a year ago, I think, just, you know, um, and it was totally different than how I remembered having watched it that first time that I watched it. Um, and I was like, oh, now I see, like, they weren't just like riding around together. Like this was happening and this was happening. Uh, but yeah, it was at the time I was 19 and she was 19 and in the Olympics. And I was like, whoa, like that's so cool. And just thinking like I would never be at that level. So then like to get to that level, it's pretty cool. And like the first few years that I started really getting into triathlon and I, you know, got the season pass ticket to watch all the WTSs online. There were a lot of flatter courses and kind of a fair bit of like big packs happening, and then the fastest runner from the pack would win. And that's, I mean, my run's improving a lot, and I hope that it will be my strong suit, but I'm still not like the best runner. I'm more of like a good biker and runner. And the races just in the last few years are starting to change so much. And a lot of that is like from like Philadelphia and Jess Larimont, who have kind of like taken it, and then people are realizing, okay, now I need to learn to do that too. And that's exciting for me and like good for my strengths. So that I'm like, okay, this is the style of racing that I can do. So it's cool to see it changing that way. But yes, like, so a similar thing this year when I was at the WTS Hamburg, I was riding at one point next to Flora Duffy, and it was like that kind of same thing where I was like, whoa, this is like someone I've watched and on TV and whatnot, and now I'm next to her. Like, so it's kind of just like I'm making those little jumps, and I guess I fangirl over the girls in front of me a bit, so I think it's pretty cool when I get up next to them.
I think it's a really good attitude to have too. It's I think it's no fun when you stop being like, it's so cool that I'm here. Like, that's awesome.
Someday I'll slow it down, but I'm pretty excited right now.
Right. You had plenty of time to like get jaded. So what's a dream race that you have? Do you have any races that you would really love to do at some point in your career?
They used to have a WTS in Stockholm, Sweden, and I think that would be really cool to go to Sweden.
Sounds amazing.
For a race.
Yeah.
I remember watching the course; it seemed really hard, and I don't know if I'm good at the hard courses, but for some reason they're just exciting to me. Like, what other races? I mean, if you want to talk like Olympics, I don't know if I don't know if I dare to let myself dream that high yet, but racing in Paris for the Olympic triathlon would be really cool, I think, because France loves triathlon. So I'm just imagine that that's going to be like a really well attended event, and probably have, you know, a lot of excitement around it. So yeah, stuff like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Well, we are, believe it or not, that was 50 minutes of talking, and you had to bear with an additional 30 minutes of talking with us before that. Yeah, this has been awesome. We are really grateful that you decided to come on and chat with us, because we don't get to talk to many ITU athletes, and I think it's really awesome for people to get to hear how the sports are similar and different. Because it's still the same sport.
Even if it scares people.
Yeah, honestly, the training's like far more similar than people like to admit. So.
Huh. Interesting. I wish more of our folks would try it out. I feel like it's such an exciting addition for people, even for folks who like don't focus on it. Yeah, that's awesome. This has been very educational. Thank you so much for making the time to come on here. This is really nice to get to meet you and like hear about what you're up to. It's really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. For those of you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would go for it. I was going to do the same.
Gonna talk to the fourth wall. For those of you out there who are endurance school regulars, make sure you come back and join us for Yoga with Amy VT tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. and then our Zwift group ride at 6:30 on Thursday morning. Yeah, thank you so much for all of your support. And Erika, thank you again for joining us. This is just great. All right, we'll be seeing you guys soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.